Mr. Siminya?
We indebted to the Commission. Prof, I am now looking at paragraph B. If you look at the foot of the page, it would be 29, where you say there should be participatory processes to ensure community buy-in, and I think that is self-evident, correct?
I think so.
I say that is self-evident that those affected by your conduct should have a say in how they react to it. I'm saying it's self-evidently correct.
Okay, thank you.
Right?
I agree that it should be self-evident, but it hasn't always historically been self-evident that the unlawful occupiers should be engaged on the conditions of their own buildings.
I could have been a little more precise with my language to say it is a self-evident recommendation that a commission should make.
Yes, I agree.
Okay. And then under paragraph A, you deal with the technical support and training, and I think this speaks to what you say about having a coordinated effort about solutions to be designed and implemented to this problem. Correct? That too looks like a recommendation worthwhile to be made by the Commission.
I agree.
That holistic intervention, as you use the phrase.
Agree, Prof?
I agree.
Yes. You also say there should be meaningful participatory engagement, and we have passed that point. Let us look at further recommendations that we deal with. And over the page, if I start now with a descending order on paragraph 73 of the recommendations. And you make a statement again that is plain that these buildings are occupied by people with low income, both South African and international migrants live in the cities, and they want to be nearby places of livelihood and opportunities, and to then deal with the question of criminality. I would like us to explore that a little bit. It would be unfair, unsound to address residents in these bad buildings as criminals. There clearly is no basis to say that. But I don't want us to be politically correct. There are criminal elements in some of these buildings, you concede that.
I agree.
Yeah. And they pose a risk both to the tenants and ought to be dealt with by law enforcement.
I agree.
You accept that, yeah. And you also addressed your evidence to the emergency housing program. Now that too has its own internal constraints. As the word suggests, is for emergencies, right?
Yes, but as I qualified, I'm not a policy expert, but my recollection of the relevant parts of the National Housing Code is that also refers to evictions. I think Nomzamo Zondo dealt with this yesterday.
Yeah, I'm saying by definition for emergencies, you don't deploy that type of funding for non-emergency positions. Would that be fair to say?
I accept that, yeah.
And also, I'm told that these programs like your informal settlements upgrading program is a conditional grant, i.e. you have no access to it unless it meets the conditions of the grant. Am I right?
That's my understanding.
Yes, and I'm just trying to think aloud that a place like 80 Albert can be used with this grant when it existed. It is not for the upgrading of informal settlements.
Well, that's, I think, what needs to be considered by the Commission is if spaces which are essentially informal settlements, shacks inside of buildings, can't be classified as informal settlements to
Yes.
have access. So I qualify, I'm not a policy expert in how these processes are registered. I just offered it as a potential consideration for the Commission.
Fitting the problem. What I'm saying is we have also visited in the inspection in loco the old post office, Risick Street. I don't know if you know it.
No.
It is a hallowed post office since the fire there, but now there are just board partitions and shacks which are built inside it. One can access this funding to resolve that type of problem. You accept that?
I think that's beyond my domain of expertise. It wasn't clear to me why the program couldn't apply in such a setting. But as I said, that's beyond my domain of expertise.
No, I accept it. It may also be with outside the province of this commission to tamper with policy preferences of a particular government. But speaking about that post office, I know you don't know its condition. The egress and ingress to that building gets people navigating very narrow passages in violation, clear violation of the bylaws relating to fire escape routes. It is not your suggestion that that type of solution must be rectified by bringing in flame protective material in that building.
I think if there's clearly blocking of fire escapes, there needs to be consideration of moving those households, potentially within the same building, but clearly if there are rooms blocking fire escapes, that's a fire risk.
Okay. All right. I'm about to get to very specific ones you mentioned, Doctor. We have had evidence that, for instance, the temporary emergency accommodations has become a misnomer. In one sense that they become brick and mortar structures. Once people are moved into there, it's almost difficult to move them out, and they acquire permanence to them. The Commission has heard from people who have been in some of these TAs for years. You accept that?
I accept that.
Might I
Could
draw
I,
your attention? Mm-hmm.
Sorry, could I just add a qualifier? Because I
Yes.
think that, yes, there are cases like Ikuteleni, others where people have been moved to TA without, for years. But I think this speaks back to the general structural issues of not clearly affordable housing options being offered to people in TAs, so people can enter TAs but not be able to exit them for lack of affordable accommodation. I'm not talking free accommodation. I'm talking about affordable accommodation at their level of income, which is why they were in the TEA in the first place. So I think I agree that TEA in itself can't be seen outside of the expansion of affordable accommodation that people can access to get out of the TAs.
And I think on the foot of the page of your statement, reading 24, you deal with something against paragraph 62, if you had to go there. I think you are saying there that this deportation style of cleaning these buildings in itself, it's ineffectual. People are deported, they come back, and you're in square one. That's the point you're making there, right?
Yeah, I've come across a number of examples of people being deported and returning. I think it's relatively well established that the borders are very porous. You know, I cite two experts, Maxim Bolt and Kudu Vanyoro, who've done research in border areas. And of course, people can come in with passports and, you know, in the SADC region anyway. So, I think we're tapping into a much wider domain here, which is immigration policy, and I have some things to say on that, but the more narrow point here, as it indicates of the poor living conditions and people at risk of fire, is that just a reliance on home affairs or deportation is not going to actually address the situation. I mean, we've tried it. We've had several of these periods of intensive raids, and it hasn't fundamentally dealt with it, because people return to the city often, you know, because of economic collapse, drought, very poor living conditions. I mean, I'm most familiar with Zimbabwe, but elsewhere. And so there are wider structural reasons which are producing, you know, migration into the city that I don't think, you know, if one is dealing specifically narrowly with how to prevent other fires, and you know, one cannot just rely on a deportation response.
Yeah, and I want to rely on your evidence to say there is no evidence that this particular tool is in itself efficient.
I agree.
Am I right? Okay. At the foot of the page of your statement, which is 21, you deal in paragraph 53,
Paragraph
5353, Chair. I'm paraphrasing. I'm just saying the essence is that there is unfortunate stigmatization to people who live in this building with scant respect to the fact that they are human, they possess innate and inherent dignity as people, and you're saying some of the tools that I use are blind to that truth, legal truth at least. That's the point you're making there, right?
Yeah, I spoke of public representations, and you know, it goes back to the discussion about the way that hijackers have been used in a very loose way by certain politicians, by the media, to speak about and stigmatize entire populations rather than actually those involved in criminal activity.
Mm. Foot of the page at 20, to your statement against paragraph 49, you say, what is apparent in my research is that the majority of residents would like to live in improved living conditions and are willing to engage in improving living conditions. And then against 50, you say, both my experiences with MSF and the ICF have shown that residents are willing to engage and mobilize to improve living condition if given support. What support are you having in mind here, Prof?
Well, you know, I gave the examples of MSF, which were given support with waste clearance, for instance.
Sorry?
I gave the example of MSF, which was provided with, you know, waste clearance. I think ICF have shown that there's a genuine interest in capacitating from buildings and building committees and improving organizations. I think that can be elaborated to issues around fire safety. You mentioned potential training around emergency management services. You know, that my strong sense from research over the years is if there are, you know, support with training, support with you know, basic materials and so on, that there would be a willingness from at least a significant number of members of the community to engage to improve living conditions. Comes back to the basic point. Mothers don't want their children to be at risk of burning, I think, or parents in general. You know, I think that if offered a space to improve living conditions and live in safer conditions, that there would be a willingness to engage.
Well, Prof, I'm really not trying to press too hard, but there has to be an appreciation at another level that even middle-class group people don't live where they want to. They may prefer to be close to a school for their children. They may prefer to be close to the pathway and the freeways. There are complications about living. They too would want to live where they prefer, but there would be constraints to some of those wishes, right?
Are you asking specifically about middle-class populations?
No, I'm just saying in any living conditions on any part of this planet, there are constraints to be where you want to be. And it must apply to, and I again say, I don't intend to be insensitive. There would be reasonable measures that exclude certain category of people from being where they would want to be. Am I right?
Of course, there are constraints, but I think that more just, equitable society takes account within resources available of allowing low-income groups to have access to livelihood opportunities and so on.
No, I accept that, Prof. There would be rebates for the elderly like me, and et cetera, et cetera. That I accept. And against paragraph 46, you say residents of unlawful occupation, in my experience, are mostly seeking spaces of safety, intimacy, and meaning under very harsh conditions. Nobody could quibble with you about that as a statement. You won't mind if I say all else being equal.
No.
Okay. And we did allude, as you do in your paragraph 45, foot of the page 19, where you make the point that this category of people, some of them at least, struggle to access formal housing. For argument's sake, your RDP house won't be available to an undocumented foreign national. That's what you are saying, and it is correct, right?
Yeah.
And tragically, the evidence in 80 Albert also revealed people living and making homes on the staircases in the building, which is troubling in itself, right?
Yes.
And against paragraph 43, you then make the category of people who typically would occupy the type of problem buildings, being recyclers, etc. Am I correct?
Sorry, could you repeat?
I'm saying against paragraph 43,
Yep.
you enumerate there various categories of people who typically would be in this type of problem building.
Yeah, it's not
Yeah.
exhaustive, but those were common categories of
That's right.
employment, livelihood that I came across.
That's right. And therefore, for that reason, they're not able to access things like banking facilities, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes.
Now, there is something you mention against paragraph 42 on the foot of the page 18 of your statement, which to me is somewhat poignant. You say, I raise these points to illustrate that the fire risks and in unlawful occupation have been public knowledge and known for some time across various departments of the city, and yet, to my knowledge, no specific department has been tasked with improving living conditions and fire safety within unlawful occupations. That so far appears to be the record before this commission, that 80 Albert was not a happenstance, in typical language, an accident. It had been an accident to happen for a very long time to the knowledge of the city. I hear you correctly when I say so, right?
Yeah, I think that the general risks of these conditions have been well known. No?
Sometimes you speak a little too soft.
Sorry. I think that the fire risks had been well established by the time of Albert Street, and that's why I noted the earlier fires. And so that there were fire risks, I considered public knowledge and well known by emergency services. I had communication in 2015 from spokesperson of emergency services indicating that so-called hijacked buildings were the highest fire risks. So this was, that the fire risks were well known. We had Cape York, we had others.
Okay. You made a statement in your evidence which I'd like to probe a little. You threw the caution that the statement by the commission, for instance, that the problem is lack of enforcement of bylaws may be imbue within it some problems. Let me have you say it in your own words, because it seems to me that if the legislative level of the city council approves a bylaw that gets signed by the mayor, it must be respected in its own terms. No?
Yeah, I accept that. Could you clarify on what you mean by in its own terms?
When there is a bylaw against a fire safety bylaw, it can't be open to discretion. It has to be applied in its own terms and in its own language. You don't leave it to officials to determine whether it is in this circumstance appropriate or not appropriate.
I accept that. I think the deeper question is how does one implement those bylaws under conditions of unlawful occupation, where sometimes you have absent owners or owners who have lost control, and if there's not the kind of engagement with the residents themselves.
Let's take an example. There are no fire escape routes. For one or other reason, it is not open for the EMS to say, well, this bylaw is there, but I can implement it.
No, I mean, I agree with that, you know, when it comes to things like fire escape routes. I guess the question is when it's things like fire escapes itself, which require infrastructural interventions, you know, and who is tasked with doing that, and how do you do that? What are the ways in which one can implement bylaws? Again, I think I would suggest that engaging the residents themselves to improve fire escapes, in dialogue with the city, EMS, the owners, is a way in which one can actually implement bylaws. I don't think it can be done just through a policing response. I don't see how JMPD can enforce a fire escape being built, for instance, or repaired.
Well, just to humor you, I had in my team a junior with 3-4 degrees qualified who didn't know that jaywalking is an offense. You know, and it is that lack of strict adherence and enforcement of bylaws that produces that outcome. That people think crossing the street at the middle of it and ducking with cars and trucks it's okay, whilst you're having a baby in your hand, as I often see when I go to my office. May be an indirect way of conveying an incorrect message that it's okay to do some of these things. That's all I'm sharing with you as an anecdote.
I understand, thank you.
Okay. We have dealt with the shortage of low-cost inner-city accommodation, which you describe as chronic, and with which we agree. The question about that, though, seems to be that, in part, the problem is budgetary issues. We can say that.
Which point are you referring to?
The shortage of social housing. In the book, you make reference to 10,000 units that were necessary by 2017, and perhaps a little bit more now in 2024.
Yeah, that was the projection of the city of potential households that they would have to apply TAA for. That I need to be clear that needs to be updated and verified with the city. It's
no, well, all I'm saying is the need is there, we know.
Yeah.
The question is whether there are sufficient resources to address them in competition with other demands on the fiscus.
I agree.
You accept that?
I accept.
Is there anything? Those are the questions I have for the witness, Chair.
Thank you, Advocate
Mr.
Semenya.
Brickhill, don't leave Dr. Solomon. Mr. Brickhill.
Arising from the clarification questions. Our next witness, so we're done with this witness.
Okay.
Unless there are further questions.
Let me excuse Dr. Willem Solomon. Dr. Willem Solomon, we appreciate that you've come before the commission to give evidence.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the work of the Commission. I think it's a very valuable, meaningful process. So
Thank
I
you.
appreciate the privilege to be here.
Thank you. You are excused as a witness.
Thank you.
Chairperson, Commissioner, we've been endeavouring to line up our witnesses and run them within the timetable agreed with the evidence leaders. Of course, we hadn't really catered for clarification questions through the afternoon.
Yes.
And we see value in them. They're, of course, a valuable part of the
Yes.
exercise. Our next witness is available. It's Ms. Royston, but in the time available, I'm not sure whether it's worthwhile commencing. She will be
Yes.
several hours.
I think it will be appropriate to call her tomorrow morning.
As the Commission pleases. Thank you, Chair.
These proceedings are adjourned until tomorrow morning at 10.